Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. It's Dr. Jentzen, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let me make sure I had it correct. Now, you were involved, you did the autopsy in this case on a Gabrielle Bear, correct?
Correct.
All right, and your initial contact with her was on January 1st of this year, and that was at the emergency room initially, correct?
Correct.
And then the autopsy was actually done at the University of Michigan facility the next day. That's when you began it, correct?
Correct. Well, we did X-rays and stuff through the night. Correct.
Understood. Okay, good. And then from that time on, then you came to your conclusions and you produced a report, correct?
I provided preliminary conclusions in the report. Yes.
Okay. And this report that I'm holding up, this is the report that you ultimately produced, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, and that was prepared or finished on the 5th of April?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you were being asked questions by the prosecutor, you gave a couple of terms. One, you discussed the cause of death, correct?
Correct.
And the second thing that the second term that you used was manner of death, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, there's obviously from hearing your testimony, there's a distinction. In this case, the cause of death, that was what you were talking about as far as the burns, the blunt force trauma, asphyxia, correct? Okay, so these are the specific, including multiple injuries that you recognize in your autopsy. That's what the cause of death is, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The manner of death, you had listed 5 different types, but I won't go through all 5, but they included homicide, correct?
Correct.
Also unidentifiable deaths at times, correct?
Correct.
And natural causes, other types of manners one could die, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, it was your conclusion manner of death was homicide, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also spoke about contributions to that can be made to that go. I'm sorry, I apologize. Contributions that can lead to the death of someone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you were speaking on that topic, you mentioned that typically you're looking at whether wounds such as bruises, abrasions, are self-inflicted versus inflicted by another person or in another manner. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's a distinction you make when you are looking at a body inside and out. You're looking to make those distinctions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, one of the topics that was brought up was the topic of possible drowning. Do you recall that part of the conversation?
I do.
Okay. And when you were asked about drowning, and correct me if I'm wrong, your answer as related to drowning was that you did not see any characteristics that were consistent with drowning, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But that doesn't necessarily, from your conclusion, that doesn't necessarily rule it out. Am I correct in saying that?
That's one of the things we look at. Correct.
Okay. And when you were talking about blunt force trauma that one, injuries that could occur from blunt force, you talked about, say, a fist, correct?
Yes.
An object, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you distinguished that from the injuries that could occur from blunt force, like a fist. You distinguished that from what could be injuries that could be inflicted through an accident, a fall. Is that correct? Okay. Now, is this all based on your observations case by case, or is there like a hard and fast rule on how do you distinguish between blunt force and accident?
There's a forensic literature that describes different injury patterns in relation to different scenarios. There's also, experience in working with cases that you identify those different patterns.
Okay. I believe when you were speaking about falls, you stated that typically falls and accidents, the injuries occur, I think you described it as bony areas, is that accurate?
Correct. Bony prominences, correct.
Okay, such as, say, the forehead.
Correct.
Okay. Just as a for instance, if I were to pass out right now and fall forward and flat on my face and say I broke a tooth, if you were to observe that injury, would you be able to, just given that, determine whether it was a blunt force trauma or that it was the result of a fall? Not knowing what happened, would you be able to distinguish between the two?
Well, a blunt force trauma is part of the injury pattern that we would see on a fall. There would be characteristics that we would look for injuries related to a fall on both the scalp, the skull, and in the brain tissue.
Okay, so you would look at additional factors.
Well, we looked at all those factors in this case also.
No, I understand that, but I mean, if you're just looking, say, at my chipped tooth, there's other factors you then have to look at to determine the difference, right?
Correct.
Okay. And as part of your autopsy, you're doing initially an external observation of the body, right?
Well, initially we did a radiographic examination.
Understood.
Right.
What's that mean?
That means that we did a full body x-rays and CAT scans. You know.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the whole body.
Correct.
Okay. And then you start doing externally an observation, meaning you are just looking at the body,
Correct.
Okay. And then once an external observation has been done, that's when you start exploring internally looking?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Great. You testified to Gabrielle Barrett's height and weight, correct?
Correct.
And you stated that her weight was approximately 36 pounds. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you gave a percentile, and I believe that percentile was 10%, right?
She was in the 10th
10th
percentile.
percentile, okay. So that means she's at the lower end of the average for her age. Is that correct?
She's almost off the scale, yes.
Okay. But there's still 10% or 9% of people that age who are less, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the height she was in the 90th percentile.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. Now, based on, and other factors, but based on that weight and that percentile, it was your opinion that indicated that she may have been malnourished. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But not necessarily, right? We don't have all the factors to necessarily make that conclusion. Is that safe to say?
Well, again, based on her height and weight, it indicate that she had decreased caloric intake. Correct.
Okay. Was food found in her stomach?
Yes.
In the autopsy? Okay. Okay, now, you spoke a lot about different injuries. I'm not going to go through every single injury that you pointed out, but you talked about burns, correct?
Yes.
And some bruises, abrasions, and those types of things, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The burns that you examined, that we saw pictures of, it is your opinion that those burns, because of the way the symmetry of them, that they could not be accidental. Is that your testimony?
The pattern, the depth, and the appearance, yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this way. based on the pattern and everything else you just said, it's your opinion that it's not an accident, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but does that mean that there's no way it could be an accident? Does that rule it out completely?
I can only say that the appearance of the injury patterns with the, the depth, the lesion pattern, and the submersion lines on the wounds are characteristic of the inflicted injuries.
Characteristic, okay. And this is based on, this is the opinion you reach, correct?
This is based on the forensic literature and studies, yes.
Right, but in this case, you were making the opinion, correct?
Correct.
All right, so it's based on your opinion, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the burns you described as a second-degree burn, right?
Yes.
And you described it as just your typical second-degree burn, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were asked about skin tissue, as to whether you could tell if skin tissue had been peeled off or if it came off in some other way. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Okay. And your answer to that was that in this case, it seemed that it was possibly, the skin had possibly eroded off as opposed to being peeled off, correct?
What I was implying is that the burn injury elevates the skin off of the body, and how that skin is eventually removed, either by friction of somebody touching the body or of it just going off by itself, I couldn't make that distinction.
Okay, you couldn't conclude that, but the skin could have eroded off, correct?
I don't know what you mean by eroded off. You mean?
It just came off itself, it wasn't peeled.
When you say peeled, you're talking about somebody actually taking it off themselves.
Correct.
Right.
That's what I mean, yes.
Right. Yeah, I understand that, okay.
Now, you, you talked about the burns and, again, the patterns of the burns on the body, and your opinion was that this must have been two separate incidences where these burns occurred, correct?
That's my opinion, yes.
Okay. And again, that's based on your education, your knowledge, but it's an opinion, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with the injuries that were seen, say on the back and the back of the legs, it was your opinion again that those must have been inflicted by another, correct?
Correct.
They're not self-inflicted.
Correct.
Okay. Now, when they're inflicted, when you say they're inflicted by another person, you can't determine necessarily if that was an intentional act or if that was something else that where another person was just involved. Is that safe to say? And I can
The injuries to the back are in a protected place on any individual, and I guess when you're saying were they accidentally inflicted, are you talking about in some medicinal form?
What I'm
or?
asking is, that's fine, what I'm asking is, can you differentiate between something that was someone intentionally had done, say used an object to hit, or it was just accidentally the people running into each other or something like that? Can you tell?
This is an intentional injury. There's no accidental forces that would create something like that.
Okay, and that's your opinion, correct?
That's my opinion.
Okay. The you had found a laceration on Gabrielle Barrett's head, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that laceration, when you were describing it and you were looking at the picture, there was some sort of, you described it as ointment on it, is that
I
correct?
described it as a dried ointment, correct?
Okay, dried ointment. And ointments are used typically for healing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall, you also spoke about some matted hair, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And there was also a place on the head where it appeared hair had been pulled out, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The laceration with the ointment on it, do you recall approximately how near to the,
It was away from the area.
Okay, so-
That area was on the top of the head. The area of the alopecia or that removed hair was on the back of the head, on
Okay.
the left back.
okay, so they weren't next to each other?
No.
Okay. And when you just referred to traumatic alopecia, now alopecia is hair loss, right?
Correct.
Okay. And traumatic alopecia then is when the hair is actually removed, correct?
Pulled out, yes.
Pulled out, okay. But there are other ways that hair loss occurs, correct?
Sure.
As far as bruises, something that,
Well, let me ask this question. What led to, in your opinion, that it was traumatic?
There was hemorrhage underneath that area when I examined the undersurface of the scalp. There was hemorrhage diffusely through that area and broken up. That means that it was removed with force when she had a blood pressure.
How do you know it couldn't have been removed after she died?
Because there was blood there. And you don't get blood with a blood pressure on a person being alive.
Okay.
thank you. Does the body bruise after death?
In very rare circumstances, the only other circumstance I know of is when it's frozen and then impacted with heavy objects to break small blood vessels, but that's the only circumstance I know of.
Why do you say the body has to be frozen?
Because that's how you get hemorrhage. The blood vessels freeze and then you can break them. Otherwise, you don't get any hemorrhage after death.
Okay.
Can there be damage to the body in some way that discolors, say, the skin that looks like a bruise?
I mean, there can makeup and other types of cosmetics possibly.
All right, well, other than makeup, if I'm in the room where you're doing the autopsy and I drop something on the body accidentally, can that discolor the skin and look similar to a bruise?
No.
You saw pictures of and you testified about the condition of Gabrielle Barrett's teeth, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you described that as formidable decay, correct?
I described it as dental neglect.
Okay. Because the teeth many of the teeth were decaying.
Yeah,
correct?
14 of the 20 teeth were rotted to the base of the tooth.
Okay. And when asked,
They were rotted to the base?
Correct.
and when you were asked, you said, well, one reason that could occur is just from lack of brushing one's teeth, correct?
No, I think we described it as abuse of sugary foods and basically dental neglect from maintaining your teeth.
Okay. So, and
Like
maybe,
a bottle rot, like when children drink a lot of juice?
Correct.
Okay.
one of the causes of death that you gave us an opinion on was suffocation, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you stated that it was your opinion that, well, let me ask you this way. When you described suffocation, you stated that suffocation can be performed by placing a hand over the mouth and the nose, correct?
correct.
Okay. But suffocation can happen in other manners, correct?
Well, it might have different names, but asphyxia has different names.
Okay.
You can have suffocation, you can have choking, you can have smothering, you can have mechanical asphyxia. There's a number of ways that you don't get air to your brain.
Very well. Okay. And the you stated that you did find some vomit in Gabrielle Barrett's lungs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can one die by choking on vomit?
It's possible.
Okay.
Usually very small infants.
Okay. Now, before you began your autopsy, did you review police reports from this case?
No, that came after.
Okay. Did you, before you began your autopsy, did you review the medical records from the emergency room department?
No, I had a limited amount of information initially, and then that was collected over the period of the investigation.
Okay. So you didn't look at the medical records from the emergency room. Did you consult with the emergency room doctor who was there when?
I reviewed the medical records eventually,
I understand.
and the paramedic records.
Understood.
Yes,
Before you began the autopsy, had you consulted with, I believe it's Dr. McGillicuddy at all?
no, I did not.
A lot of the different injuries that you described, you gave an opinion on numerous times on the age of those injuries, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you can pinpoint a range of when an injury may have happened, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But you can't give an exact date, time, anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you did notice when we were going through the pictures, you did notice that there were some marks that had been left by the resuscitation attempts. Do you recall
Yes.
saying that? Okay. You were talking about the eyes, Gabrielle Barrett's eyes, when we were looking at some of the pictures, and you stated that you could pinpoint hemorrhages.
There were pinpoint hemorrhages, one on each eye. Correct.
Okay, so the proper term is pinpoint hemorrhage.
Correct.
Okay, so I said.
Or petechial hemorrhage.
Very
Correct.
well, very well. But as you stated, those, when you looked at the pictures today, when you were testifying, those weren't reflected in the pictures, correct?
I couldn't see it from here now.
And additionally, as part of your autopsy, you do a toxicology report, right?
Correct.
And in this case, when you did a toxicology report, one, you found caffeine, right?
Correct.
And two, you found an amphetamine, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the description you gave of that amphetamine, you stated that what the toxicology report showed was that was at a therapeutic level, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that essentially means it's a normal level. Say if I had a prescription, I should show a normal level if I'm keeping up with my medication, right?
Correct.
Okay. So there was not too much, not too little, right?
Correct.
Okay. And Adderall, you were asked specifically about, but also other drugs, can be prescribed and used for different reasons, right?
Right,
All right, so one, you said with Adderall could be concentration, correct?
correct.
And you also said that Adderall can be used to assist with behavioral problems, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. But you don't know from your experience whether Adderall and those types of drugs are used on younger children?
That's correct.
And additionally, just on that note, the drug or the injection that was given to by emergency personnel in trying to restart the heart, and do you know what that drug is? Because I would.
Ephedrine?
Oh, thank you, because I would say it incorrectly, I'm sure. You stated that ephedrine could show up on a toxicology report as an amphetamine, correct?
No, I said in my opinion, it does not cross-react with amphetamine. It is a stimulant, but the fact that this is not a screen that was performed, it was a diagnostic concentration and identification of the drug. So the drug was identified by a mass spectroscopy method that actually saw and identified the drug. So it's not like you're doing a preliminary screen to see what's in your urine. It was a diagnostic test. So
What's the difference between a preliminary screen and this, and when this, I can't even try to say what you just said.
If I could just give an example, Your Honor, when you go into the emergency room, they do a dipstick on the urine, and they would say, there's an opioid there. There's an opiate. But they can't tell you.
The stick might turn a different color.
Right, but they can't tell you what type of opioid there is.
Right.
Okay, it might be Vicodin, it might be heroin, it might be something else. But when they actually put it through the laboratory like we did in this case, we can say it's this drug, not that drug.
And it's some specialized form of testing that that you do laterally that determines this is a Vicodin or this is a opioid, whatever.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. But you had stated that there was additional testing that could have been done to possibly determine whether the ephedrine was...
No, I don't think I said that.
Okay, then I stand corrected. Now, cause of death, we've gone over. You talked about burns, right?
Yes.
You talked about asphyxiation, correct?
Correct.
And you talked about blunt force, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, giving those three, is it your testimony that one of those happened, you just don't know, or it was all a combination?
It's my opinion that the child died from asphyxia,
Okay.
and that the burn pattern was a fatal burn pattern, and that the blunt force trauma that the child experienced also could have been a fatal injury.
Okay, and then you also...
So I guess to sum up, it would be a separate or in combination.
Okay, okay. And then toward the end of your testimony, you did articulate what you called an alternative theory, which could have just simply been shock. Is that correct?
I didn't bring up the shock, just that in any of those cases, the body goes through some kind of a systemic shock pattern, where there's cardiopulmonary insult, lack of oxygen to the heart and lungs, and eventual death.
Okay, okay. And just to conclude, when you're doing these autopsies, when you're producing these reports, you are coming up with your opinions based on what you're seeing, correct?
Yes.
All right, I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Doctor, there was one, for some reason, and this is me, blunt force injury that was one of the constellations. That was the scalp and so on, that I did not articulate, but was part of the constellation of blunt force injuries, correct?
Correct.
And what can you tell us about, we're not gonna put more pictures, but can you tell us about what happened to her head and scalp?
There were a number of blunt force impacts to her scalp. They were seen both by the naked eye after I shaved the hair off, and then when I reflected the scalp back, there were a number of bruises to the scalp.
And can you tell us what reflected means, please?
To look under, we looked underneath the scalp.
And sir, when you mentioned that this grouping is under blunt force trauma could have been fatal, did that include these head injuries that you were talking about?
Yes,
And so those blunt force traumas that included these head injuries could have been fatal, correct?
yes,
The burns could have been fatal burns, correct? The asphyxia could have been fatal, correct?
was fatal, correct.
Was fatal, and all of these would have caused a shock process, as you described, correct?
Correct, a separate or in combination.
And I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Step down, witness.
Can I be
No.
discharged?
Oh, I thought you said you want to say something else.
No.
Yeah, you can
No.
be discharged.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's take a stretch break. Next witness, and this is my understanding, will be the last witness.
Last witness.
Last witness for the day of the case,
Thank you.
for the case. Okay, we might gotta go a little overtime, let's get this done, okay? All right, call your next witness. Please be seated. State your name for the record.
John Toth.
Sit next to him. All right, very good. Spell your first and last name, sir.
John
You
Toth.
may proceed, Councilor.
Thank you. We got your name. What's your rank, sir?
A detective sergeant.
And what police department?
Sumter Township.
And I will cut to the chase. Would you describe yourself as the officer in charge of this case?
Yes.
And does that mean you are the main detective?
Yes.
And what are some duties that the officer in charge would have?
Making sure that we have the right personnel to tackle the situation that we're faced with. Understanding organization of an investigation to make sure that,
And you spelled T-O-T-H?
yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
To make sure that organization is continued and followed throughout to the end of the investigation.
Part of your job as officer in charge would be to either interview witnesses or send other officers to interview those witnesses?
Correct.
And you were involved with, in the beginning of the case, we read all the potential witnesses of the people, 2 pages here. You were involved with either having these witnesses interviewed or directing your personnel to interview these witnesses?
Correct.
And would you have also gone to the scene?
Correct.
And as part of your jobs, would you have reviewed all the documents and evidence and anything that was collected in this?
Yes.
So it's fair to say that you've gone through everything that was ever collected or gathered as it relates to the investigation into the death of Gabrielle Barrett?
Correct. Our department also wears body cameras at every aspect of an investigation. So the responding officers have body cameras. Our vehicles are actually equipped with the component that goes with the body cameras. So every aspect of the investigation is also on camera.
Now, I want to ask you a question. Did you request 911 calls in this case?
Yes.
And did you receive those 911 calls back?
From Caroline Township, we were able to do inter-office communication. After the dispatch center makes a determination that the phone call has to be transferred to the next portion of what's needed through a dispatch center. So you have the initial 911 to police and then forwarding on to medical. The medical, we did a search warrant to obtain their documentation, but we have all of the 911 call.
All right, I'll move for the admission of people's 89 and 90. Those are the 2 different parts of that 911 call that the officer just described.
No objection.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. I'm going to play the first part. speaker.
And don't forget how we set them up. Hit the microphone.
911, where is your emergency?
84 Green Meadow,
What is the address?
84 Green Meadow, Bella, Michigan.
What's going on out there?
My kid stopped breathing, she woke up conscious and up and out, though she fell asleep in her bathroom, and her food and water.
How old is she? Okay, stay on the phone, I'm gonna transfer you to ETA, I'll get our fire department there now, stay on the phone with me.
All right, that first portion you described as when they first called 911, they spoke with the dispatcher.
Yes, we're a consolidated dispatch between Sumter Township and Huron Township. So if you're in Sumter Township and you call 911, the phone call generates into Huron Township. The 911 dispatcher answers the 911 call. From there, what happens is, once they make the determination in this fact, we have a medical situation, they then press a button. It then transfers over to a medical. They remain on the line until they can hear that there's an established contact between Huron Valley Ambulance and the person that's called 911. And the operator will then generate police and fire, which is their aspect, and then it continues on to HVA, and then from there they make a determination of how they're going to deal with it. But then there's another connection.
Okay. And that's the cause for the two parts of the 911 call?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to publish for the jury Exhibit 90, that's the second part.
And what's the fire address?
84 Green Meadow, Bella, Michigan.
What is it?
84 Green Meadow, Bella, Michigan. I am talking to him.
84 Green Meadow in Sumter Township?
Yes.
And what's your cross street?
I don't know, I'm in Rockerville Woods Park.
Okay, what's wrong?
My 4-year-old, I got so people sent me to the club. I was to make her breakfast, and now she won't come conscious or anything because I need out.
Listen, I can't understand what you're saying. What's wrong there?
She's not breathing.
Okay.
I don't know, she's so deep in the shower down, I'll make her food.
Listen, I'm getting some help to you, okay? Can you get her on the ground?
She's been on the ground, we've been pulling in her throat. She's yelling her to go before sleep.
She's been gone since last night, you think?
No, she passed midnight an hour ago.
Okay, take a deep breath so we can talk, okay? It's hard to understand you. How old is she?
She's 4.
She's 4? Okay, when you get her onto the floor, we need to start CPR.
She's been doing CPR.
Okay, how much does she know how to do it?
She's getting on to CPR, she got to what?
Tell her everyone's coming as fast as they can. You need to put one hand in the middle of her chest. Use one hand only if she's 4 years old, a little girl. Use one hand in the middle of her chest between her nipples. You're going to press down hard and fast. Use the heel of one hand only if she's just a little girl.
Yeah, I know.
Okay? And we're going to keep doing compressions over and over and over.
I am. She's got, you can hear, but I'm not breathing. You can hear something in her lungs, so.
Okay, that's okay. That sometimes it makes noise when you press. Does she have any obvious injuries or anything like that?
No.
Okay, all right.
Here.
Is she in the bathtub?
She was in a bathtub.
She was in the bathtub?
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep doing the compressions. We're going to start breathing forward, so we're going to do 30 compressions, then we're going to give her 2 breaths, okay?
There's very good person to do breath.
So we do the count to 30 out loud, and then we're going to tip her head back, plug her nose, and give her 2 breaths. Then we're going to do 30 compressions again. What's she saying?
Go ahead. My mom's doing it.
Okay, I'm going to stay on the phone until they get there, okay? Everyone's still coming as fast as they can. So you found her in the bathtub?
She was in the bathtub. She puked everywhere when I walked back in. And then I know she went under and I pulled her out and she said I just said she cannot stop. I don't know what it is.
Okay, so she was in the bathtub. You came out first for a second, went back in and found her under the water?
She puked right when I walked in and then she went underneath the water.
Okay, so where you want this, you want it in the water, okay. All right, we're gonna keep doing this, she's doing 30 compressions and 2 breaths, right?
You're sitting, no, what, 30 compressions and 2 breaths, okay?
30 pumps on the chest and 2 big breaths, or 2, medium-sized breaths, because she's a kid.
Please.
Just gonna keep on doing this until they get it. Everyone's coming there as fast as they can for you, okay? You hang, is she a healthy girl normally, Mom?
Yes.
Okay, and when you look at her face, is she blue or gray?
Does she look like what?
Is she blue or gray in color when you look at her little face?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Let's just keep on. We're just going to keep doing this over and over and over and over and over until help gets there, okay? 30 pumps, 2 breaths. 30 pumps over and over and over. If she starts to move or anything, then you tell me right away. Is she wet? Does she have water on her?
The dog here, Jasper! We are! She's coming after us!
Who's there, ma'am? Who's there?
We got her!
Okay, and
She's getting what?
your mom's still doing CPR?
Oh, yes, we gotta go to the doctor. She came back to the house, so I came back in the bedroom. I don't know.
Well,
This way, let's put down there. There's the chair, sir.
who's here, Mom?
I don't know.
Let's take care of somebody right now. Who's going? Okay. Who's with you? Are the police there?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
Okay, so somebody else is there, right?
Yeah, the police are here, they got her.
Okay, I'm gonna hang up and they'll take care of her, okay? Okay, bye-bye.
I know.
Sergeant Toth, or Detective Sergeant Toth, my apologies. Are you aware of when the 911 call was placed?
I believe it's 10:41 a.m. on January 1st, 2018.
In part of your investigation, did you have the opportunity to observe Cynthia Diaz's cell phone?
Yes,
Okay, and that, for recollection's sake, is the grandmother who testified on the first day of trial.
yes,
All right. Did you observe the call log to Cynthia Diaz's phone?
yes.
And how many calls did you see placed to her from Candace Diaz's phone on the first?
The exact number, I can only estimate it from recollection to be on the low side, probably 5, and on the high side, 7.
Okay. And do you remember the time in which the phone call was that was answered before the 911 call?
The phone call that, when you look at the phone logs, you can see that the very first call is,
Object to testimony to what the phone was.
Sustain, just don't say, okay.
We'll move on,
Go
George.
ahead. No, go ahead. Just rephrase.
Did you learn the difference in time between the 911 call and the call to Cindy Diaz?
yes, it's 10:05 is the call to Cynthia Diaz, and 10:41 to 911.
Thank you.
So 10:05 to Cynthia Diaz,
Yes,
and 911 was what time?
10:41. I think it's 36 minutes.
So it's 36 minutes later.
Yes, I believe so.
Go ahead.
Are you familiar, this is a procedural question, are you familiar with the address of the location?
84, Green Meadow.
And what city is that in?
It's in Sumter Township, but our mailing goes by zip code, so it's Belleville.
Okay. And
So what's the distance from where her mother lived to where she lived?
Well, her mother was staying at Mr. Stewart in Westland. A map quest puts it at about 26 minutes, but she had to drop off her dogs.
Oh, go ahead.
And that 84 Green Meadow address, is that in the county of Wayne?
Yes.
And, let's see here. Finally, did you were here when Lieutenant Gerard testified
Yes.
about the phone dump, correct?
Yes.
And he testified that he had received some text messages between Candace Diaz's phone and Brad Fields' phone.
Yes, he did the data dump, which would then allow us to view in a raw form. I'm not an expert in that area, but he's able to grasp onto that stuff so that we can see it.
You reviewed, as part of your investigation, the text messages between Brad Fields and Candace Diaz?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 96. It's a 7-page document that's been redacted from People's 146 that's already been admitted into evidence. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes.
Is that excerpts of those text messages between Candace Diaz and Brad Fields?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to publish them to the jury
You may. Any objection
No objection.
for receiving?
very quickly, Judge.
What number are they?
Not Exhibit 96.
All right, go ahead.
All right, you got that exhibit in your hand there? I guess you can read along on the screen. This obviously is a different format than the Facebook messages. Over here on the left column, it says inbox. What's that indicative of?
That means you received a text message.
Okay, and this phone number right here, do you see that phone number?
Yes.
Ending in 4425, are you familiar with that phone number?
It's Brad Fields' phone number.
All right, and it's got a date and time stamp here.
Yes. That it's 5:28 and 55 seconds on November 7th, or excuse me, November 2nd of 2017.
And it looks like it's already been corrected from that UTC time.
Yes.
All right, so that's an Eastern Standard Time?
Yes.
All right, so this was sent from Brad Fields' phone, received by Candace Diaz's phone, is that right?
Correct.
All right, go ahead and read that statement.
She said she peed again in her pants. I smacked her. I don't know what that word is. You can check. If so, she and big more shit.
And was the response?
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next page here. That was from page 10 of the original exhibit. And these ones, unlike the Facebook records, read from top to bottom like normal reading. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, let's go ahead here. It looks like we're on the 5th of November. What's the, looks like it's sent from Brad Fields again?
Yes, it says, you dummy, should have listened, by her eye is, I think it's starting to bruise. Is stirring, bruise.
And was another message sent?
Yes. Puke 2 more times in toilet.
And it looks like one more was sent there as well.
Peed in him again, giving back.
All right, let's move on. That's page 12 from the initial exhibit. Move on to page 13. Looks like November 11th in the evening hours, 6:15. What's being sent here?
It says, what can I do for her mouth?
And that's sent by?
That's sent by Candace to Brad.
All right, and Brad responds?
And baby be chewing inside of mouth is in nothing, gargle salt water.
All right, and there's another message sent here?
It's sent to Brad Fields from Candace Diaz. The thing in the middle of you are teeth. On top, the little skin piece is sliced open and her tooth went into her lip. You can, she see fucking with her mouth, but the 2 spots where you hit her.
Move on. That was page 14 of the previous. Let's move on to page 17 here.
This is December 12th at 12:27 p.m. To Brad from Candace. Well, in my last room, and I got to pick Gab up, she puked this morning and now not wanting to eat. Do you want Milky DS?
And response?
The fuck, TF.
Alright, that's page 17, let's move on here, page 26, that's the last page. When are these messages sent?
Okay, so these messages are sent during the time that my officers are out there and they're dealing with the situation. The child being Gabby has been moved to the ambulance. Officer Salagen is under my instruction. I'm not even there yet. I've been instructed on we need to get consent to start securing information about the residents, drawing it out and stuff. And while she's speaking with Salagen, this is what she's texting to Brad, who's inside the house.
Alright, and what does she send to Brad?
I'm probably going to jail.
And does she follow up another statement?
She does. Get everything out of the house. ASAP, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
She send something else?
Oh, yes, this is a little bit later. If she lives, she's gonna token from me saying I don't do nothing for the burns. When I put ointment on them, what the fuck? I'm done. I'm killing my fucking self.
And what does Brad say in response? It looks like, let's check the time difference there. That's about 7 minutes later. What does he say?
They tried to arrest and search me too, and Zoe.
Most importantly here, at just 4 seconds after he responds to that, does he say something else? Right here.
Yeah, oh yeah. It says, love you.
And who sends that?
Brad sends that to Candace.
Alright, and you said the 911 call was at 10:41?
Yes.
So this was about 40 minutes after the 911 call was sent?
Roughly.
Okay, and you were here earlier when you testified, or when Officer Salagen testified, correct?
Yes.
And you saw those video clips from his body cam, correct?
Oh, yes.
And they showed Brad Fields in the kitchen area of that trailer, correct?
Yes.
And these messages were being sent right about that time when Brad Fields had his cell phone, right?
Yes, he still has his cell phone at this point.
Alright, and he sends another message here, it looks like about 30 seconds later, right?
Yes.
What's he say?
They can't do nothing. I'm going to jail because, or BC, I wouldn't sign for them to search the house.
Alright, and does Candace send a response here a few moments later?
Yes, she's responding to the, she responds, love you too.
Does Candace send something later?
Call me please.
Nothing further, Judge.
Redirect, cross-examination, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Detective Sergeant.
Good afternoon.
On the day of January 1st, thank you.
Yeah, now put that back now.
Yeah, I'm putting-
Let's take a stretch break.
Join on the other side. Everybody's set. Thank you. On January 1st, 2018, when you were at the location of 84 Green Meadow, part of your job was to just keep track of the investigation that was going on at the location, correct?
Correct.
Okay, make sure the right personnel are there and everything's getting done correctly, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you know approximately, other than yourself, how many police officers from your agency went in and out of the location during that day?
What? Can we have a 5-minute recess?
All right.
No, tell them they're not gonna do it when they're ready. I'm sorry, when you're ready. We should- They'll not.
Okay.
It didn't print with the squiggly lines.
All rise for the jury. You may be seated.
Settled.
Settled.
Okay. I believe the last question I asked you was,
Personnel.
do you know how many police officers from your agency went in and out of 84 Green Meadow that day?
Police officers from my agency starts with Cox to Salagen to myself to Chief Luke. Then Sergeant Casey is called on to service so that as personnel is needing bathroom breaks or different things, we'll have somebody that maintains security at all times. He does go into the residence, but his primary function is not anything other than security of the property known as 84 Green Meadow. Officer Belowski is called in to aid with me. From there, the night shift comes on to service, which is Sergeant Stefani and Officer Goschuk.
So,
And in between there, we invite Michigan State Police Forensic Unit
the
in.
forensic unit came in, okay. So if I counted correctly, including yourself, there were approximately 8 officers from your agency who went in and out of the...
If I said 8 names, then I would agree.
Okay, you would agree with 8, okay. And did you, during that investigation of 84 Green Meadow, excuse me, did you or any of the other officers keep some kind of a log of what officers came in and out?
There's a report that's generated, it's not a time-stamped report, however. But we also wear chest cameras, and it's on chest camera.
Understood, okay. I have no further questions.
Redirect,
Nothing, Judge.
step down. Next witness.
Judge, I have no witnesses. I have 2 or 3 statements before we rest our,
Stipulations.
yes, we have a
He
stipulation.
says statements.
One's a stipulation, one is another portion. People at this point will move into evidence a stipulation which is marked as Exhibit 126.
Why are you saying
Oh, you're right. I don't know. I just was.
Any objection?
any,
No objection.
for receiving? Next.
It's 4 sentences, I'll just read it briefly to the jury. States on January 5th, 2018, a warrant for the arrest of Brad Fields and Candace Diaz was authorized. On January 9th, 2018, Brad Fields and Candace Diaz were arrested in Lowndes, that's Lowndes County, that's in the state of Georgia. While driving with an officer down there, Brad Fields stated that all of this was just a misunderstanding and that they were on their way back to Michigan to turn themselves into the U.S. Marshal's office. Brad Fields and Candace Diaz were extradited back to Michigan subsequently.
So stipulated.
Additionally, Your Honor, there are witnesses on the witness list at this point. I believe counsel is okay with waiving the rest of those witnesses in their presence.
Is that correct?
We have gone through them, that is correct.
At this point, Judge, people have nothing further. They rest their case of chief.
Very good. The people's case of the people of the state of Michigan versus Brad Fields is now over. As I indicated to you before, the defendant remains innocent. He's innocent right now, and he remains that way unless and until you bring back a verdict that's different. The defense does not have to call a witness. and the defendant does not have to take a stand, and you can't hold that against him. We talked about that in the very beginning. We will find out whether there are any witnesses at that time, okay? And we'll find out Thursday. I'll see you probably at 9:30. Now, what are we gonna do, Judge? I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do. Because of the length of the trial, the court is going to give each side an hour worth of time to address you. Now, the prosecution aims to break that up in an hour because they get to address you twice. Why? They bear the burden. And because they bear the burden, they get to go twice. Do you understand that? After they finish their presentation to you, then we'll instruct the jury. But when I say 9:30, I'm in there. We'll determine whether or not at the point that there'll be any witnesses that the defense wants to present. But if they don't, you can't hold that against them. You made a promise about that. It's the people that bear the burden. And they bear that burden. And it's a very heavy burden. Okay? So what I'll do is I will see you Thursday, but those are going to be procedural how we will proceed, okay? And hopefully I'm believing that, I'm being optimistic, you know, I'm believing that we should have this case to you, which means that 2 of you will be dismissed for deliberation probably no later than 2 o'clock on Thursday. All rise for the jury. Knock on the door when everyone is ready to go. Court's in recess. Thank you.
Happy birthday.